Good morning, good afternoon, depending where you are. I'm Linda Lee and Larry Bremner, and we are work and life partners. So you'll hear we interrupt each other a lot as we go through the presentation. Well, maybe we just enhance each other's.
Enhance.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
Um, we have a company called Proactive Information Services, which Larry founded in 1984. Prior to that, we worked in government, school districts, and Larry worked in market research for a bit as well. We are very grateful to be living on the shores of Lake Winnipeg. And we are so thankful to be able to live, work, and play on the original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji, Cree, and Dakota peoples on Treaty 1 territory and the homeland of the Red River Métis. We recognize the sovereignty of Indigenous peoples who have lived in kinship and served as stewards of this land, water, and air for thousands of years. We commit both personally and professionally to respectfully listening, learning, and collaborating as active participants in truth and reconciliation. I'll start by saying a little bit about me more personally. I come from a white settler background. The pronouns I use are she, her, and elle. You can see that we are dog lovers. You see at the bottom there, Larry and our two dogs, Lucy and Rollo, out in front of our property in Lake Winnipeg. And my roots go back quite a ways with Lake Winnipeg. You'll see at the top there the black and white photo, my grandfather and grandmother. They built a cottage in the 19 teens, which is on the property across the street from us that my sister has. And you'll also see my mom was a dog lover there. My dad was a navigator in the Royal Canadian Air Force in World War II. You'll also see family photos there and a couple of CES colleagues when we were in Newfoundland and Labrador. I'm also president of the Kerry Blue Terrier Club of Canada in my spare time. Larry and I are both trying to retire, but it's not going that well. We're really pleased to be here and also want to congratulate ICCI on the success of its community of interest.
And as Linda said, I'm Larry Bremner. I'm Métis. The bald person pointing out at you is my grandfather, and the black and white person next to him is my great-grandmother. And below her, that's a picture of my grandfather on my great-grandfather's lap. My great-grandfather and his father were two of 30 Métis who signed a petition that they sent to the federal government protesting the giving of their land to the Prince Albert Colonization Company. The petition was ignored. They fought at the resistance at Batoche, and when the resistance didn't go the way they were hoping, they moved down to the United States and came back to Canada, homesteaded in near Dormy, Saskatchewan in 1905. Some of the other pictures are a reflection of my life. The people on the stage at the bottom there it took place in Nepal. That was the announcement of the SDGs, and it was also the announcement of the new global network called the Indigenous, which I had argued and fought for. And some of the people up in the right-hand corner are some of my Indigenous colleagues. I've had the good fortune of working with Linda and other colleagues in a few of these countries. I always say if you're thinking of becoming an evaluator or a consultant, I'm an evaluator. I never thought evaluation would let me see the world and meet so many wonderful people working in NGOs who are trying to make their communities better. I was also known for a while at the office as Larry of the North, and these are a few of the communities that I've had the great opportunity to visit and work in around northern Canada and the territories. I've been really, really fortunate. I mean, I don't know how many people have been to Sigachik or Lexicay, but there's some beautiful, beautiful communities in Canada which Canadians don't have the opportunity to see.
As Vanessa mentioned, Larry and I have been involved with CES for decades. And I think I just want to highlight Larry was the driving force behind the global network, Eval Indigenous, and its first chair. He is also co-editor of the permanent section in the Canadian Journal of Program Evaluation called Roots and Relations, celebrating good medicine in Indigenous evaluation. Do your speech here. It's an open access journal, so anyone can access the journal, and you'll find in the Roots and Relations section there are many different kinds of submissions, which include poetry, muckluck logic model, and so it's definitely worth a look. I was the founder and co-chair of the original CS Diversity Working Group, and as well as serving on the credentialing board, I was part of the team, as are some other people in this session today, Gail and Birgitta, worked on revising the CE competencies and including a competency regarding truth and reconciliation. Before I reference this, I'd also like to mention that we will be telling some stories as part of this presentation. And I know some of you out there, because I see familiar faces, will have heard some of them, so bear with us. We like to reference the Canadian Evaluation Society's core professional values when we present, and they fit so well with working with Indigenous communities. So upholding the rights and well-being of persons, peoples, and all of nature. And I think that we're becoming more and more aware of the importance of nature and sustainability in our work. Seeking truth, honesty, and transparency. And the turtle stands for truth. Being responsible to all engaged in or affected by our evaluation work. CES has also made a commitment in its statement of advancing reconciliation and Indigenous sovereignty to explore changes in our practice with humility and open minds. And I think that the humility and open minds are really an important basis for working with Indigenous communities.
So almost 30 years ago, Rigney said that Indigenous people are at the stage where they want research and research design, evaluation to contribute to their self-determination and struggles. And he also made the point, and we've been hearing this a lot more frequently lately, is that Indigenous people think and interpret the world realities in differing ways to non-Indigenous people because of their experience, histories, cultures, and values. And we're going to talk a little bit about this later on, but relationality is really, really important to Indigenous people. The commune, not the individual. The relationship between our natural world, the human, our non-humans, and our spiritual world are all intertwined and are part of our realities. And a good example of different worldviews, I was speaking with a person in Nunavut many years ago, and he mentioned to me that, Larry, rocks are living things, rivers are living things, ice is a living thing. If we respect them, and they will give us what we need to live in harmony with the system. But in formal education curriculum, they're non-living things. We need to ensure a place for both worldviews. And I was thinking about this the other day because this had to be probably 20 years ago. And just recently, the Southern Chiefs organization in Manitoba here have gone to court to get Lake Winnipeg declared to have all the same rights as to life and liberty as human beings. And the Yukon River, the First Nations are going there as well as a river in Quebec has been declared to have the same rights and responsibilities as human beings. So I see that as really having an impact on our practice and on our realities when we start thinking about going into Indigenous communities. So if we know better, let's start doing better and start with what you do. So we want to become kin. We've just had a couple of new editors come on Roots and Relations, and we're calling them our kin editors, and because they're part of us. So
That leads us to a real foundational concept. And years ago, we used to talk about cultural competence, but how can you be culturally competent in other cultures or perhaps even in your own? So we're now talking about the importance of cultural humility. So that's a process that requires us to continually engage in self reflection and self critique and see ourselves as lifelong learners and reflective practitioners, not as the experts. We're listeners and learners. And we also need to recognize our positionality and be sensitive to the power balances and exploitation that has occurred over generations and centuries. As part of that, it's really important for you to know your own origin story. Origin stories are personal, and my actually graduate work is in history, Canadian history. So I really relate to the fact we cannot look at the present or the future without looking at the past. We really need to know where we came from, and we need to recognize what our values and worldviews are, because you're coming to a place carrying that with you, and you need to understand how that may be, I don't want to say in opposition, but that may be very different from the worldviews when you're walking into different communities. So you really need to be sensitive about that.
I also I also suggest that by knowing your origin story, you have a better understanding of the lens through which you view the world. But I've also suggested in the past, I'm involved in some things with Indigenous Services Canada, and I think it's important to know the origin story of your organization because that might help to explain some of the decisions that are being made, the policies that have been drawn up. And so it's our origin stories, but also trying to look at the origin stories of the organizations in which you work or that
Or work with.
work with.
I'm not going to read this to you, but just really want to emphasize the importance of taking time. And at the CES conference recently, the fellows had a session on some of the tensions in our work. And one of the tensions right now is the pull between clients wanting things speedily and the importance of taking time. And time is particularly important when working with Indigenous communities. And so when we see an RFP that says we'd like you to use an Indigenous approach and the report's due in 6 months, we say thanks, but no thanks. And then, as I think I mentioned in one session at CS as well, then we will write back to the organization and point out the problems with that approach.
It's also um, not only the Indigenous approach to evaluation and research takes time, but it takes time to rebuild trust that has been broken time and time again by consultants working in Indigenous communities where work has been done, nothing has changed in the community, but the consultants either get to write about it or they get tenure because of it or they get monetary rewards, whereas nothing changes in the community. So it's really important to take the time to rebuild the trust and then take the time to do your work in an authentic way that authentically reflects the realities of that community in which you're working. Um, there's a lot of different kinds of, I guess, frameworks. I particularly like the Maori one. had the good fortune of being at the Maori uh, evaluation conference in Aratura about 5 or 6 years ago. And so I just thought I would throw this up in terms of what you might be interested in. What they say is respect people. When you go into community, respect the people, let them define their own space, meet them on their own terms, meet people face to face, become a face that's known in the community. I'm going to talk about this in a little while, but when I was doing some work for the wellness camp, on the land wellness camp, and went
In the Northwest
in the
Territories.
Northwest Territories. I went, met the people, met the elders who were requested the evaluation. I left. I came back a couple weeks later, and the big question was, why are you back here, right? And I said, well, you've got I've got to get to know you, you've got to get to know me, and I've got to know the realities of your day-to-day operation here. So over time, I became seen as just one of the people in the camp, right? So it's important to become a face that's known in the community. We have here, it's important to look, to listen, and then maybe speak. But let people speak. Give them the opportunity to have dead space when you ask them a question, because your priority isn't necessarily their priority, and they haven't been thinking about the question you're going to be asking them until you ask it. Okay. Share, like be generous, host people, bring tobacco, bring wild rice, bring something. They're giving of their time to you. So you should be generous to them. They're being generous to you. It's important to be cautious, be politically astute, culturally safe, and remember, you're an outsider. You don't have insider status. But you should be politically astute because there are a lot of different things happening in different communities. Do not trample on people's dignity. Be humble. I always say you should go into community and with humility. They're the experts in their own reality. We're not. And so we should learn from them. If we leave a community and I feel like I haven't learned something, then I've failed in that community. So this is from Nan Wikapahinia, which is basically, she's Maori, and this is where she sees evaluation moving. So it's been done to us, and then it's been done for us. And what we're talking about today, I think, is with us. And from an Indigenous perspective, we'd like it to become by us and then as us. And so we're on a continuum here. And so the important thing is with us means that Indigenous communities have meaningful input into what is going on. The work reflects their priorities, it reflects their challenges. They have the opportunity to validate the work and to use it as something to help with self autonomy, self-government.
Okay, I'm going to reference some resource here that I would really recommend. It's called Protocols for Non-Indigenous People Working with Indigenous Knowledge. And if you Google that title, you will find the document. And I think it's a really helpful resource. And we're gonna speak a little bit about it. It's a different framework from the Maori, but it's very similar. So they have a protocol bundle that they identify in this document, and there are 5 sections to it. Each is reflective of a ritual object. And so the first one is a container, and this is talking about when you're first working with community, it's best to be invited in. But if you're seeking an invitation, it's best to do it through someone who is culturally involved in the community, through a common affiliate, so that you have a way to enter the community in a good way. Larry's also mentioned that every place and peoples have different protocols. Cultures are different. Even the way you might go around the circle in an Indigenous First Nation community can be in a different direction. So those are important things to do your homework before you go. I will also mention that this is just kind of an intro to this bundle, and under each of the sections you will have you'll find a number of different points that are also really helpful. Things like if you're accepted into the community, prepare your stories, your knowledge, the things you bring with you to share. You are there also to share. It's a reciprocal relationship. And another point would be to declare your positionality, your affiliation, your knowledge, your area of expertise, your place, and your identity. So I think you'll find that the points under each of these sections will be very helpful to you. The second section, the ritual object is ornament. And one thing you have to know is that if you're invited in and given permission to work in community, that only lasts as long as good relationships are well maintained. So you need to really work on that relationality. That's a huge word you're just going to hear us keep repeating. And if you're working on change making, again, as you go through the process with community, you must keep asking permission. There's no begging forgiveness here, people. It's asking permission.
The next ritual object is a tool, and basically it's the work you're doing in community is for the benefit of the community, to increase relatedness and the health of the biocultural systems. If the action in service of enriching relationships, or is it to enrich particular persons or organizations? You have to be clear of what your work is doing and why it's doing it and how it's going to help to improve the community. Oh, sorry. Whoops. Okay. Tool. So 4 and 5, productive device. Outsiders are expected to accept direction and decisions, and we should make sure we're attentive to signals and warnings provided by humans, non-humans in the kin relationships. And the fifth ritual object is weapon. And what they're saying here is well-meaning attitudes and good intentions aren't as important as the impact and the unintended consequences of your work. I love this quote. I've used it for years because a lot of times when people get projects and they're successful with the RFP, they go into their office, they come up with a framework and they come up with a methodologies, and away they go. And Esby says here, the need to ground the work in Indigenous culture and community, render it impossible to select one predetermined methodology to accommodate this paradigm. You've got to work with the community to see what is appropriate in that community, and then you work with the community to get the information that will benefit the community and that you need as well.
So we have a few stories we're going to tell. I don't know if we'll have time to tell all of them. We are storytellers, particularly Larry, and some of you I know have attended our workshop on storytelling. So we're just going to give you some examples of some of the challenges and rewards that we've had in working with Indigenous communities and organizations. And the first one I'm going to talk about is we worked for the Indigenous Inclusion Directorate of the province of Manitoba a number of years ago. They wanted a resource for teachers to help them with Indigenous student inclusion, student family inclusion in the education system. And the work was called Mama Tuisawan, which was a name gifted by an elder, and it means the wonder we are born with. And this resource became actually the policy for the Manitoba government, which we weren't really expecting. That was lovely, with increased funding to support Indigenous inclusion. And that led us into another project, which was on basically on trying to find ways to get enough Indigenous language speakers as teachers into the education system, because as we're all aware that knowledge or language in many communities has to be reclaimed. A lot of language has been lost. And the one experience I had, and this is kind of a story about being prepared for what you're walking into. We are doing a really broad-based consultation with different groups and communities on this process, how we could develop an action plan for more Indigenous language speakers. And I went to speak to the First Nations Education Directors Group in Manitoba. Larry couldn't be there. He was off probably in the north somewhere. And I knew as a white settler woman that I might be challenged. And the reception welcome was warm, but partway through, when I was taking questions, there was one fellow got up and said, if I see an email from you that says Indigenous in the subject line, I'm not going to look at it because I'm First Nations. And so that distinction-based approach is really important. And then a few other people, I took some criticism, and what you can do is accept those with grace and listen and expect that you may get challenged because of your positionality. So be prepared and be gracious always. So that's the first story. The second story is from when we were working for NCPC, National Crime Prevention Commission, something like that, on the evaluation of 5 youth gang projects and in Winnipeg. And one of them was working with male Indigenous youth who were at risk of being in gangs, or their family was already gang involved. And so I was welcomed very warmly. The organization that held the contract was an Indigenous organization. And I was welcomed warmly by the team leader of this project, and we worked together to build a circular logic model. And it was a multifaceted 5-year project. You don't need all the details, but I was trying to find a way to connect with the youth in the project. And I found out that they were volunteering at the Winnipeg Humane Society. So they were really, and they fed the neighborhood cat. So I brought one of my dogs when I wanted to talk to the boys as a group. And there are about 15 boys in this program. And when I first got there, my dog's name was Kevin, our dog. There were like 2 boys willing to talk to me. I had Kevin doing some treats, doing some tricks. And by the time, all of a sudden, I had 13 boys in the room willing to talk with me because we had a place to connect. And that was through our love of animals. And at the end of that project, too, the team leader wrote part of the case study, his reflections. So, but those connection points, silly as that may seem, really, the boys would always welcome me after that. And they'd say, "Where's Kevin?" Or "Bring Kevin and leave your husband at home." That was a good one, too. The next story, and I am going to reference Gail Barrington's wonderful book here, because this story is in Gail's book about our work in the Yukon. And we're working for the provincial government there. And we thought we had this great plan of getting community voice. So they arranged that we could meet with their First Nations Education Advisory Committee. And we told them about this wonderful plan we had to train students who were in the Native Education Teacher Program, as it was called at the time, to go out and do interviews in the community. We thought this is capacity building. They'd know the community. Some of them would have the language. We would pay them. So it would be all in all a great thing. So we presented this wonderful idea, and there was silence. This wasn't a good silence, we could tell. And then finally, one of the members, an elder actually, spoke up and said, "That's not a good plan. We want you to come to community. We want to invite you into community. You're writing the report. You have the power in terms of saying what is going to be said from community. And we want you to experience our land and our water and our context." And so we said, well, we can't go to all 13 nations. So they chose four for us to go to.
And one of them was, there's a picture up there, Rampart House. One of them was Old Crow, which is inside the Arctic Circle up in the Yukon. And they had arranged for an elder to meet us. So he was our guide in the community. We said to him that we would like to speak to people in the council office, the band office. And he said, okay, you walk in. If their door is open, introduce yourself. If their door is closed, don't bother them. And we said we'd like to talk to some of the people in the community. He said, well, you walk around the community, and if you see somebody, you can introduce yourself. And if they want to talk to you, they'll talk to you. And if they don't, you won't. And Rampart House was their traditional home down the Porcupine River. So there were an exchange students there. So for whatever, we were on boats on the Porcupine River, use that as an opportunity to talk to some of the community people. We had a fire and talked to some of the elders around the fire. So one of the things for people who haven't worked in Indigenous communities, and even if you have, what you have to be is flexible and you have to be creative. Because as I mentioned earlier, your priorities aren't necessarily their priorities. We're taking their time and we expect them to drop everything and talk to us. And they have lives to live and organizations they're working for. So you have to be flexible in how you go about interacting with
in
them.
this case, they did want to talk to us because Old Crow is up inside the Arctic Circle, and their youth had to go to Whitehorse to go to high school. And as one of the elders told us, the cover has changed, but the book remains the same.
Right. And then in the bottom left-hand corner, that's the On the Land Wellness Camp, part of it in Northwest Territories. Oh, the right-hand corner, right. And I always get my right and left confused. Anyway, and that's the On the Land Wellness Camp. And I guess one of the things I said when we were in Edmonton, and I'll say here is, just because you're Indigenous, doesn't mean you're a good consultant, whether that be an evaluator or researcher. And just because you're Indigenous doesn't mean you're going to be necessarily accepted into the community just because you're Indigenous. So even though I was approached by the elders and Indigenous people to evaluate this, and even though I had worked with one of the traditional healers in a different project, the first day I showed up, the traditional healer looked at me and said, "Who are you? Like, are you blood?" So I had to go through explaining who I was, my positionality, and and he sort of said, "Oh, okay." But in some communities, some First Nations communities, being Métis isn't a helpful thing. But the thing is, you should be aware. If you go into community, you should explain your origin story to people, like we mentioned earlier, where you're from, and what your positionality statement is. The bottom picture with all the little huts, that's another First Nation community in Northwest Territories that I went into. I was supposed to be going with an Indigenous health consultant, and the night before he had a family emergency, so I had to fly and then drive into this community by myself. I went. First thing I did is went to the band office and asked if I could meet with the chief. They said, "You don't have an appointment. Come back in the afternoon." I came back. Anyway, to make a long story short, I hit it off with the chief, and he took me around the community. it was the same thing, but there's a Métis association in that community. I can't meet with the chief without meeting with the Métis association. So I went and met with the Métis association. And I couldn't meet with the Métis and the chief without meeting with the mayor, because then that wouldn't have followed the correct protocol. And when I talked to the people at the Métis, I said, I'd like to talk to some people who went through this project. They said, well, Clara lives in the yellow house at the end of the street, turn right. There's only two houses there. And that's basically how you go through community and talk to people. So I always, I always want to make the point that um, consulting, being an evaluator, being a researcher, it's more than focus groups and surveys. It's trying to authentically reach the people in a meaningful way. And so these were just a couple of quick stories. We've got a million stories.
Yeah. So we'll move on.
We'll move on. So basically, what we need to do is move from transactional to relational in our work. So traditionally, we're very transactional, right? Transactional is about conducting business. We want to build relationships. Transactional is buying and selling. We want to recognize and value interconnectedness. Move from contractual, negotiable, debatable to dependent, mutual, and in relation to others. We want to optimize move from optimizing to get the most for the least to be engaged, centered, grounded, clear, generous, humble, and kind. We want to move from being transferable, convertible, up for grabs to proximate, concomitant, and complementary. We want to move from requiring resources to requiring time, and we don't want to debate. We want to have a dialogue with what we're doing. So basically, in our work, we want
Can I
to.
just interrupt for 1 second?
Yeah.
That goes beyond working with Indigenous communities
Yes.
as well.
Yes. We want to move from being extractive, being, the people we work with are participants or informants. It's got to be grounded in respect and seeks to validate Indigenous worldviews or other worldviews. If you're working in an Ethiopian community, it's the same thing. You want to move from being context, values, and on the ground struggles being lost to move for the output for use by the peoples and the community. You want to move from the communities not being involved in the development or the validation of what's being done to processes and final products are the responsible to the community and who are the final judges of the validity and effectiveness of what your work has been. And you want to move from being judged by the standards of the dominant culture that doesn't affirm or validate Indigenous or other worldviews to something that's action oriented. It works as a motivating factor for practical and direct action among Indigenous peoples and communities. So this is from Nikki Bowman, a good friend, colleague of ours. We want to move from our bodies, minds, and spirits can't continue to be mined and extracted from, like the natural resource extraction happening on into our planet.
So just to sum up, if you need to really take something away, and again, I would recommend the resource we cited. Remember the 5 R's: respect, relevance, reciprocity, responsibility, and relationality.
That's it.
So we sped through that last bit so that we make sure we have time for any questions or reflections. So please.